morning. It is really good to be with you today. This series, this chunk of passage, we're going to be living in this. We were going to do it just for 4 weeks, and we kind of are going to stretch it into 6 weeks because we just started talking more about it. There's all these powerful different spins to it. And you take this story and you put it up to that sort of that gem, that stone. You turn it different angles, and you see the way in which maybe Jesus is really trying to make some rich and some profound statements that are not just relevant to the day, but are relevant to our experiences today and our reality, what we're dealing with in our day-to-day experiences. So again, you got to remember, Jesus in this story is speaking to a couple specific groups. And he's not, I don't think, trying to give them a story that sort of just warms their hearts. He's not just trying to kind of move people with this nice, cutesy little parable. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to shatter categories. He's trying to sort of take the myth and the local angst out of how people are seeing themselves and faith in God and Judaism and insiders and outsiders. And there's two specific groups in which Jesus is telling this story that I just read to you. The first group are definitely the outsiders. They are the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the Gentiles, and these would be considered the sort of lower class in terms of the religious elite of the day. So Jesus is talking to that group, and that group self-identify with the younger son who takes off, squanders his dad's wealth, and then ultimately wants to come back home. That's that group of people. And that group of people, when they hear this story, they desperately and beautifully self-associate with that. And they see all of it in their reality. The second group of people is the group that self-associates, or they might not know to self-associate, but it is who Jesus is identifying them with, is the older brother and the religious leaders. So you got these two very specific groups. And the religious leaders would self-identify with the older brother from the standpoint of sort of this moral obedience, this faithfulness. The one brother who did not leave. The younger brother leaves and squanders all of dad's money, but not the older brother. He stays around and he takes care of things, and he's helping provide for his father. He never turns on his back. He never turns on tradition. He never turns against culture or religiosity. He is staying true, and the religious elite kind of hear this, and they say, yes, that is us. And so it's very easy, and it's very simple to imply that the younger son is the prodigal son. That he is the one who is, again, taken off, and he has squandered his father's money. He's embarrassed the entire family, and has the audacity to come back. But that part of the story, we all sort of see that in his unfaithfulness. But I wonder if the older brother as well, maybe he too could be perceived as a prodigal son. I mean, he devoted his life to a very moral cause of sort of being faithful and providing. He saw himself as this sort of staple in the community, this one who was strong and who you could be looked to. He was this, again, as Jesus is telling this story, the religious elite are hearing this, and they're hearing themselves say, I am this person who's got it all figured out. But I wonder if in a sort of a crazy turn of events, they both are the prodigal son. They both, in a kind of this weird way, and Jesus, I think, is saying this at a very subversive level, and I'm not even sure the hearers, the religious elite who identify with the older brother, are hearing this or seeing this. But maybe the older brother and the younger brother, they're both rebels, because they both really didn't seemingly have a genuine love for their father. They were trying to manipulate him. They were maybe doing it out of a sense of disrespect, as the younger brother would have, and then the older brother would maybe doing it out of grudging duty, the sense of, Dad, I got to do all the right things. I adhere to all the rules, and I did all of this, and you still are honoring the younger brother. Something is wrong with that. Because ultimately, the father, all he wanted, this is the beauty of the story, all the father ultimately wanted was connection with his boys. That's all he wanted. He didn't care what they did or didn't do. He just wanted connection with them. And every time he kind of comes back with this, guys, don't you see I'm grateful that you've served me well, but at the end of the day, this thing is all yours anyways, and that's irrelevant to me. Come, let's hang out with your brother. He's returned. And of course, when the younger brother returns, the father's so excited to see him, it doesn't matter kind of what he did. It doesn't matter about his past. He's more concerned now about the present, that there's the potential of reconnection. And so both of the brothers, in a very real way, are prodigal brothers. They're prodigal sons. In a real way, they are manipulators and they are users. One just does it from a prettier disposition. The other one does it from a wilder disposition. So when I read the story of the older brother, so last week we focused mostly on the younger brother. When I read the story of the older brother, which I want to kind of focus on today, in a real way, I think maybe most of us in this room actually can self-identify with the older brother. It's the space most of us live. I know it's a space that I find myself living with sometimes, and there are parts of it that I'm not very proud of. The older brother, he was obsessed, and maybe you can identify with this, with achievement and performance as being kind of like the top priority. And for him, it was this sense of self-righteousness. He was living up to all these expectations. The religious leaders, this was the same narrative. All these hopes and all these thoughts that they saw themselves as in terms of what God wanted them to be. That they found meaning in getting things done, in doing stuff, in identifying as a certain group of people, adhering to rules, and in being moral and religious. They found, albeit a false sense of security, but they found some security in that space. The older brother, I think, is something that many of us in this room can self-identify in terms of often we become so consumed with how people see us in the stuff that we do. Whether we're maybe serving in a certain way, or we're volunteering in a certain way, or we're posting online all the great things that supposedly we are doing in our spiritual realities, whatever that looks like, whatever that means. And often we do it from a space of, look at what I'm doing, look how I'm existing really well as the proverbial older child. And also, I think what's been helpful is, as you look at a story like this, one of the things I'm beginning to realize is that religion, really for many of us, is our actual default mode. That many of us sort of move towards the older brother disposition more than the younger disposition. That you and I actually have to work at pushing away from image management and what we think people think about us and how people perceive us. So it's an interesting experience as I look back on my own life. So I grew up in a relatively straight-laced encounter. I went to a private religious school growing up, which was fine, but it was completely closed in. And we just circled the wagons and just sort of took care of each other and patted each other in the back and kind of lived in a bubble. I went off to a university that was just a bigger version of the same thing. Bunch of rules. Now you got to understand, if you have a system where there are rules, you want me a part of that system. Man, I like a good system that makes sense, that I can see, that I can quantify, that I can measure myself up against. Am I succeeding in this? Am I failing in this? When I was in college, it was not a military academy. It was a real university, which I would never even tell you the name of it because I'm so embarrassed that I went to this university. Literally, you can't even find it online. I don't put it on social media. I don't put it anywhere at the university I went to because it's so horrific in terms of the mark that they make in our culture now these days. All that to say this, they were obsessed with rules. And they were obsessed with making sure that we aligned with those rules, theological, practical. Every day you would have to leave your room. It'd be set a certain way. You had to have your bed made and your floors vacuumed and the garbage can emptied. And if you didn't, you would get what they call reps or reprimands. And so many reprimands ultimately get you kicked out of the school for not emptying your garbage can. Now, it's kind of ridiculous, I know, but that was part of the system. And I can remember fitting so well on that. I mean, I went through undergrad and graduate school, no reps. I killed it. I graduated and I fit into this thing. I knew exactly who I was. I saw myself as somehow pretty good in that system. Simultaneously, like any of those sort of systems like that, any of those religious, horrific institutions that many of us have been a part of over the years, invariably you have people that rebel against it, right? You have the the partiers and the wild crowd and all these dark, wicked sinners that actually people like me looked at and said, oh, I wish I could just be that for one Friday night, right? Just one, but that is no way I could ever allow that image to go away. So I maintained this sort of persona that was, I adhered to all the rules. I bought all the stuff. I believed in it. I crossed all my T's, dotted my I's. And my friends who were living these sort of crazy, wild weekend lives, some of them got kicked out of school. Some of them didn't fit into the system. Some of them left. Some of them might have graduated, but they kind of just, they were under the radar. Nobody knew kind of how crazy and wild their lives were during the weekends, whatever it was. So there's this interesting journey that I find myself on. I graduate, and I enter into my 20s into this. I start working for a nonprofit that was where I met my wife Taryn and Matt and Don and the other founding pastors here. We got together and we met in that space, and so grateful for that space. But that space was similar to the academic institutions in which I came from, in that there was a certain set of beliefs and systems that you had to adhere to. And as long as you lived up to those expectations, all's good. And so I actually really did well in that institution, that system, because again, I could measure myself up against not only job productivity, but sort of this a perception of spiritual somehow maturity that I thought I might have been, because they would say that this is a certain standard, and if you can hit this standard, then somehow you're mature. And invariably, it was just doing things. It was, you read your Bible a certain way, you prayed a certain way, you talked a certain way, maybe you would dress a certain way, you would attend certain locations or certain experiences, you would claim your identity with God a certain way, and in that space, then you would self-subscribe and fit in really well. Simultaneously, all my wild friends who graduate college, they've graduated college, and they're in their 20s as well, and they're beginning to realize, okay, you know what, if I really want to settle down and get a job and be responsible, I have to maybe live a little bit differently, and so I can't be as wild. So they get jobs, and they kind of amp it down a little bit, and then they might find somebody they want to marry, and so they find this spouse, and the spouse is kind of pushing them to sort of, can we not be 18 anymore and grow up a little bit and be a little bit more mature and make some decisions that are a little bit more illustrative of an older marrying couple? And they might start, many of them started kind of re-engaging the faith that the parents imposed on them in their childhood. And then many of them had kids. And invariably, that sort of solidified, oh, wait a minute, we need to go back to church. We need to go back to the religiosity of which, frankly, I rebelled against and didn't want. But that's part of what it means to grow up. At least that was in their mind. And man, if I had to go through Sunday school and the torture of that church as a child, clearly I'm going to do the same thing for my kid. So then they go into that institution. And before you know it, these people are then sort of raging against people like me who in the next few years, in my 30s, I kind of bump into this, wait a minute, I've lived all the right ways. I've said all the right things. I've done all the right processes, and I've got the right, I guess, degrees or whatever it is, and it leaves me profoundly wanting. I mean, nowadays I find no energy in that space. No life, no spirituality, nothing of any consequence. And what I began to do in my 30s is I began walking away from whole swatches of the stuff that I used to self-identify with. And my friends now were taking on more of the stuff that I was dumping, that they never really engaged till they felt like they had to. And I began looking at the mentors in my life, in their 50s and their 60s, and realized, oh my goodness, if I don't make changes, I'm going to be that. I'm going to have to live out a disposition that I am not finding any sense of energy or life in. So I have to figure out some different things. And I began to ask different questions about God and faith and church and spirituality and religiosity and the scriptures and all these stories that I've been told all my life, and began to sort of cut off pieces of it. And began to connect with other people who were helping me in that journey. And then Matt and Taryn, Don, and I, we start Watershed. And many of you reinforce the questions that we are asking. And you begin to say, yes, I struggled too with that sort of form of faith. And so before you know it, we're finding ourselves like letting whole chunks of what we have held to as sacred go away, because ultimately it's been lifeless. In that process, people online, because now social media's come on the scene, people online who were wild and crazy in college, now who are like swung the other way and are massively judgmental of people that used to be like them or people like we are moving towards. And online, you're getting completely beat up by different people because for the first time, they're hearing people like myself who are, now we're starting a church and letting stuff go that we used to hold to, that we're an affirming community. And well, you can't go there, Scott, but we're there, and we're grateful that we're there. And there's way more energy and life in that space than there ever was in a non-affirming community. That we're playing with stories of the Bible like this that are, I think, really rich, and we see them completely differently today because of the theology that we no longer hold to what we feel like matters more in who we are these days. And the point is this: our default is to go towards a religious disposition. We literally have to work at here, I think, of saying, all right, you know what, we are going to claim identity in certain ways, but we also have to let certain things go, and we also have to know that we don't have it all figured out, and we hold it loosely. All this kind of language that you hear us talk about here quite a bit. But if we're not careful, if we don't intentionally ask really hard questions, the default mode is for us to move towards the older brother's disposition. It's something that we're wired to do. It's something that we seemingly have to work intentionally against. Because once you go that way, what begins to happen, once you enter that older brother disposition, what it does is it makes younger prodigal sons. You get to this place where you no longer have the ability to sort of draw people in. What you're doing is you're pushing people away from the religiosity, from the experience here. I know here at Watershed, the hope is, and I say this with all due humility because I know we screwed up all the time, but I hope every once in a while we create this culture here that says you might be the younger child that's coming back, or you might be the older brother, the religious obsessed, sitting in here thinking that somehow you've got it figured out in terms of your faith journey. And in this space, you begin to realize, like, I'm just trying to figure things out. I don't know what things always look like. I'm just trying to take God seriously, and then not myself too seriously at times. But what I sure as heck don't want to do is somehow think I got it figured out, so that when somebody comes in here who does not have it figured out, they feel like they can't be around you, feel like they can't connect with you. I can't tell you how many times this happens. People walk in here, and they come up to me after a service, and they go up one side down the other of the heresy that I have preached on a Sunday morning. Which, true, absolutely. It is heretical. I don't know. I don't know this to be true. I'm speculating just like you guys are, right? And they're frustrated, they're because they need to know that, no, this is the way it always is. And when you edit it for people, when you give them the room to discover, they might wake up. But the moment you stand up and say, nope, this is the way it is, this is the way we got to do it, this is the way you have to adhere to things, then what begins to happen is you start to lose the people that are questioning. You start to lose the people that are saying, I'm vulnerable to God, I'm open to what it begins to look like. And the older son in us begins to make younger prodigal sons. So when I look at the older son, if there was anything that was something that he was living with that I too have had to really navigate recently, maybe more so in the last couple years of my life than I ever have had to before, and I think this is true of most prodigal son or the older son type dispositions. It's the whole conversation of bitterness. I mean, I love a good dose of bitterness myself sometimes. I mean, you can only imagine what the older son was feeling. He's abandoned. He too was rejected. He too was hurt. My goodness, after all, you're my younger blood brother. You've got my name, and you'd squander our father's wealth, which ultimately was going to be mine as well, along with you down the road, and you take off, and now you have the audacity of coming back. Who do you think you are? So of course he's hurt. Of course he's angry. Of course he's frustrated. Of course he doesn't want to go to the party. My goodness, after all, who does my younger brother think he is coming back? And Dad, why would you ever accept him back this way? Shouldn't we at least let him know that he was wrong and sit him down and kind of beat him up first and then let him come back in? But that's not what happened. And so what does the older brother do? He just wallows in it. Bitterness and angst, it sits there for him. I'm 48 now, I've gone about 46 and a half years, for the most part, with ever really being screwed over. I mean, it's happened subtly, but for the most part, whether I've just been lucky, whether I'm just a really sweet guy and people like me, whether, I don't know, whether I'm paranoid, so I'm real careful things I get into. But have you ever found yourself giving something away with nothing in return, but then that thing you gave away, somebody sort of used as a dagger back at you? Like they took it and then they abused it and they spit on it and they, so I know for some of you that has been a reality for you. You've seen that maybe in your marriage, and the hurt and the pain of what you've had to go through because he or she left you. They took what you gave them and they squandered it. And many of you live with the resentment of that. And in a real sense, that's very real. Or maybe you worked for a company and you worked so hard, you gave so many hours and nights and weekends, and there's no sense of 10 or 15 or 20 years later of valuing you, of giving you opportunity for promotion, or seeing you from this perspective of more than just a worker bee. And you come away angry and, again, in deep pain or angst. Or maybe there was just a good friend that you had for a lot of years, and you did something for them to help them out, and they turned it against you. And I know what that is personally like. In the last couple of years, I have had to navigate that myself. And what happens is, at least for me, I find myself, I can get lost, I can wallow in it. I can feel this sense of tension, this sense of frustration, this sense of bitterness, this raw sense of hate. It's visceral. And I know it jacks me up. I know it haunts me. I know it is something that I cannot allow to have sort of victory and let it win in my life. But there are days it happens. And for those of us that often sit on the high horse of the older son, the older daughter disposition, it's going to be the way we respond to pain and hurt. It's going to be our default way of when somebody uses us. Often, if maybe your disposition is, well, I'm actually the younger child, that's the prodigal son trying to come back, you might sit there and say, you know what, I deserve this. My goodness, I did this to Dad. Why would I ever have any resentment towards anybody else? But if you're the older prodigal child, the one that's faithful, the one that's reliable, the one that has it all figured out, then it would make sense that you deal with a greater amount of bitterness and hurt and anger. This is something that I think most of us who live in that older son disposition, it haunts us. Because after all, you worked really hard to do the right thing. After all, you were the one that was always there tilling the ground and the dirt. And after all, you were the one managing the estate. And after all, you were the one that really took care of the marriage. After all, you were the one that really provided for the family. Or after all, you were the one that really sort of nurtured the household. After all, you were the one early in the morning at work and left late. And after all, you're the one that did all the right things. And somehow, all the good things that you did got turned against you. Because to the older child, to the sort of religious elite, fairness is everything. And you have to live with the economy of fairness in that space. And so when things don't work for you, you don't know how to categorically put those things. And so you find yourself just seething with resentment and anger and bitterness. And something that, it's one of those things, I don't know how you get over it, except time, right? It's sort of like we've done series on forgiveness around here. We spend weeks talking about how you forgive people and what it means to forgive somebody. But at the end of the day, I'm still pissed 8 weeks later that person's in my life, right? They hurt me. They screwed me over. It doesn't go away. It's something you have to work on. Supposedly, it's character building, I'm told. So maybe that's what's going on here, right? That maybe when you try to do all the right things and it doesn't happen, part of it is it resets how you see yourself. That maybe when the pain or the hurt resurfaces, it's a reminder of your vulnerability. It's a reminder of your disposition to give away, and people are going to sometimes use that when you give away. But maybe the grace of the Father in this story is like, I don't care. I want to connect with you. So yesterday, we were at the Whitewater Center. And I have almost a 14-year-old and almost 11-year-old sons, and if you want to do things together, you have to do things that are active with boys that age. So, again, my wife and I we're not mountain climbers by any stretch of the imagination. We're not whitewater rafting people, and we're just clueless that whole process. But our boys love that experience, so we wanted that's family time, and so we went to the whitewater rafting center. And so if my body's killing me right now because I'm trying to climb these walls, of which I get like 2 feet off the ground, and if you've seen the one wall there, it's this wall that's really high, and I know Brian in our band here, this dude can climb like a maniac, and you got these walls, I guess maybe 12, 14 feet, and then they go to like 30 feet, and you climb these walls, and the higher you get, they're arched out, and these guys are hanging from these things like 30 feet in the air, and I get like 3 feet up and fall, and then you fall into water. So it's kind of a cool experience. And what they do is they do it in 30-minute bursts. And so you have this 5-minute sort of lesson they give you. I think it's just for insurance purposes. So they tell you how, what not to do and how to climb this thing, how to jump in the water and how to get out and all that kind of stuff. So they give you this kind of lesson. Then they sign your bracelet when you've been through that lesson, so then they can let that group in for 30 minutes to fall off these things into the water. And so Keen wanted to go back over to this thing. It was like 6:30 at night. Man, we've been going all day. And he said, all right, go. I'll be over there in a second. Go run. I can't run right now. I'm just too tired. Go run. I'll be over there in a minute. So I show up, and he's waiting outside where the little sign says, wait till the next training. So there's a group sitting in there, like 40 people, getting their 5-minute story, their 5-minute training. Keen had been standing there the entire time. My 11-year-old son was standing there the entire time. Showed up maybe just a minute or two late, but has already heard this spiel 4 times that day. And here's the spiel, and I said, all right, and I said, Keen, now get in line to have your little band signed from the guy who just taught the 5-minute deal, and then let's go into the water. He sat down on the bench. He said, no, Dad, I got to hear the whole thing. No, I missed like the first 30 seconds of it. I got to hear the whole thing. I said, no, son, listen, it's all good. It's all good. You've already heard this. No, Dad, I've got to stay here. I gotta. And so he sits his little fanny down on the bench, and I had literally had somebody from Watershed who was there, who actually served in the greenhouse this morning, was like, man, I just saw this banter you had with your son. What's going on? Everything all right? And I literally had to say to Keen, here's the deal, son. He's a Pharisee. He's a rule follower. It's okay if you miss the first 30 seconds. Let's just walk over to the guy. He's going to sign your bracelet. But Dad, what if he asks me questions? Don't worry about it. I'll answer for you. We walked over. He signed it. Keen kind of gave me a thumbs up. And he goes in and climbs for 30 more minutes. And for many of us, get so caught up in the crappy details of religiosity that we miss the moment of why we're there. Right? He was going to sit for another 30 minutes until that class resumed again for no apparent reason. He already knew the content. He was going to miss out. And part of what grace does is it comes alongside of us. Part of what the Father does is it comes alongside of us and he says, man, do not get caught up in the details. You already know this stuff. Frankly, it's not about what you know. It's about now you're going to go live it. Climb that wall and have the time of your life for the next 30 minutes. And for so many of us, we show up on a Sunday morning. Man, we're embittered, we're hurt, we're angry, we're still miffed at that previous church context that screwed us over, that used us, that took our money, that took our time, they didn't appreciate us. And that might be true for you. And there's no magic pill you take to let that stuff go away. Except maybe at least the first piece of it is just to identify yourself as maybe that's you. Maybe you're that person. Maybe you're the person here today that's sitting in this auditorium and you're seething a little bit because somebody just told you something in the last couple of weeks or last day or so that is hurting you, that is messing with your identity, was messing with your infrastructure, with your belief system. And you don't know what to do with it. So you're hurting. You're angry. And you find yourself not being able to wallow in the community, in the relationship, with that person or with that circumstance. That maybe you walk in here and you look across the way and you see somebody here that has hurt you. And you're missing out on being here now. You're missing out on being present in this community. And so this whole story, this whole thing, is this amazing parable of Jesus saying, hey, can you hear this, guys? Like, some of you are wild and crazy, and you finally come back to the Father. And some of you are out there, you think you got it all figured out, and I'm inviting you back to the Father because ultimately, all the Dad wants is connection. That's all He wants. He doesn't care about your moral compass or your moral code. He doesn't care about what you understand or what you don't understand. He doesn't care about the past, previous, or current or future decisions you're going to make about how you live your life. Ultimately, He wants connection. I think it's pretty apparent that the Father in this story is God. Is Jesus implying that God is vulnerable to us. He is extending a sense of connection that He wants and longs to be in presence with you. That when we slow down for a few moments on a Sunday morning and sing some songs and you begin to realize, oh man, it's a third song, my leg's a little sore, or man, when are we going to land this thing, or when will He shut up, or whatever it is, right? Like, maybe what's happening is we get caught up in the uncomfortableness of what's going on and miss out on the beauty of we get to connect with the divine right now. Whatever that looks like, however that plays out for you. So in just a second here, we're going to sing a little bit, and maybe this morning, maybe for the first time, you are pushing aside all the noise of how you feel about people and the bitterness with which you're resting and the religiosity which often dictates and controls your life, or the past sins of a previous decision. And maybe you can sit in this space with a sense of grace and gratitude towards what God is inviting you into in terms of wanting to connect with you. And so God, we this morning love you. This story is such a fuel and a resource for reminding how profound you are. That the essence of the universe who created us longs to be in connection with us. That when we slow down during the week or this morning, or maybe we find ourselves being with people we love, or being around a good meal, or taking in the scenery, and just some of these small things, realizing that you're in that. And when we're living in that prodigal younger son or that prodigal older son disposition, like, we miss out on all this stuff because we can't see any of it, because all we do is we're caught up in our own stuff. So Father, for the next few moments, we give these minutes to you. We give these minutes to you we want to connect with you, whatever that means in each of our own skill sets, in each of our own traditions. Father, we're grateful for who you are in our lives, and we say this often.